not about preaching. Preaching is proclaiming. Counseling is listening. It's listening to the person's personal narrative to find out why, in fact, he or she drinks. Maybe something happened in his or her past which is painful and they can't cope with it by talking about it, so they drink to forget about it. Maybe they've been abused and they can't talk about it for whatever reason. It may be repressed. Whatever happened was so terrible that they honestly don't remember it, and through hypnosis it will come to fruition what has happened.
Welcome to JustMen, a life-changing program that resonates hope as well as encouragement. The program that gives you information and inspiration for the glory of God. I'm your host, Jeff Tate, and thank you for joining JustMen. On today's program, we have a very special guest. He's no stranger to our program. Please welcome Dr. Dean Reverend JasonCurry. Brother Curry, welcome to JustMen.
Thank you very much.
Man, it's a tremendous pleasure for you to be on our program again. And man, you've been busy, man. It's been since 2010, and it's been years after, and you're still doing strong, and you're still doing things in terms of just ministry. And now you moved into pastoral counseling. I didn't even know you had that part of you. So before we dive, I really want to hit the ground running, really, sure. In terms of that. I know that people know a little bit about your background, but if you can kind of give us a quick bio on who is Dean Curry, and then we can kind of get into your book, your new published book that you have.
Sure, thank you. It's great to see you again, and congratulations on your many accomplishments, and may God continue to bless you and keep you as you continue to excel in the field and make a meaningful change in the lives of men and women throughout the nation.
Wow, beautiful.
My name's JasonCurry, and I currently serve as Dean of the Chapel at Fisk University. I've been the Dean for about 9 years or so, and I'm also an assistant professor of psychology. What do? I do four things, and it took me a while to sort of capture what I do succinctly. Some people think I just sit in the basement and contemplate the stars in the universe and don't do anything substantive, but I do four things. I preach on Sunday morning and coordinate the ministries that are on campus, and there are roughly 5 or 6 major ministries sponsored by local churches. They're parachurch ministries affiliated with the churches. So I preach and coordinate the ministries. I teach as an assistant professor. I teach about 3 courses a semester in the Department of Psychology or in the core curriculum. I provide pastoral care and counseling to many members of our university community, faculty, staff, students, administrators, and constituents, friends, stakeholders, if you will, that have a vested interest in our success. And I publish. I'm fortunate to publish a weekly column in the Tennessee Tribune newspaper, and I am fortunate to be able to finish a book and have it ready. I'm very happy about the first book, the Star Book on Pastoral Counseling, published by Judson Press. So there are other duties as assigned, of course, but essentially those 4.
Wow, that's beautiful. Like I said before, there's so much depth and so much information that your book is loaded with. So I really want to dive into that to help people. So let's dive into the Star Book, pastoral counseling. Why the book, and who is the book mainly geared towards?
Sure. It probably starts with a personal narrative. I've been helped by a number of people, men and women, throughout my life who have dedicated a portion of their lives to helping young people develop spiritually, culturally, and academically. I'm married, and I've been married for 18 years, and one of my first questions to one of my fathers in the ministry was, is this the right woman, and how do you know, and I'm in love, and can you help me to sort through these dynamics, if you will? And he took the time to listen to my concerns and to experience in his own way my questions and anxiety and help me find the correct route to engaging in this lifelong covenant, this lifelong commitment. I'm a minister. I've been called to preach, and the call is nebulous, spiritual journey, if you will, and you need a mentor to help you develop your call. First discern it and then develop it. And there were several mentors, I call them fathers in the ministry, who helped me to sort through the ever-changing spiritual and cultural dynamics associated with the call to preach. So I'm a beneficiary of pastoral counseling, and I wanted to give back in some small way to the ecclesiastical and cultural and academic community that helped to produce me. Also, there are a number of ministers who are doing what they're supposed to be doing, praise God. They're building the church. The Great Commission says, "Go ye therefore into all the world and preach the gospel of Jesus Christ." They are doing that, and they are building the church, bringing new members to Christ, and of course, amassing those financial and capital resources necessary to grow the church. Unfortunately, there are some aspects of the Christian ministry that go neglected from time to time, like the Christian education ministry. I was saddened to hear that some people are joining the church and are automatically becoming members without going through new members classes to understand what they're supposed to believe. And along those lines, I think that the pastoral counseling ministry, the interpersonal ministry between the pastor and the parishioner is being neglected as well. There have been a couple of studies on the subject, empirical studies, where pastors have been surveyed, and pastoral counseling is not the primary or secondary concern of many pastors. And again, I say it's good because they're focusing on the major ministry of the church, bringing people to Christ. But people are hurting, and people need specific individual ministries in order to live full lives and to contribute to the body of Christ. So my book looks at a specific aspect of pastoral care. Pastoral care concerns the general ministry of the church, or ministries of the church, preaching and teaching, for example. Pastoral counseling is an aspect of pastoral care that specifically looks at the interpersonal or intrapsychic, or extrapersonal concerns of the individual. Intrapsychic has to do with conflicts in the mind. You want something, but you want something else. You need something, but you need something else, and it creates a conflict. You want personal happiness, but you also want a lot of money, and it creates a psychological conflict. Or an interpersonal conflict, a spouse is angry with his or her wife, or a boyfriend is angry with his or her girlfriend. Or an extrapersonal conflict, everything is okay with the person, but the social and economic conditions in which the person lives, poverty is the problem. They're innately intelligent, but sexism is the problem, or racism is the problem. So pastoral counseling seeks to address interpersonal, and extrapersonal problems as they concern the individual, the couple, or the family.
Wow, that's beautiful. Yeah, and I understand that cognitive dissonance, and when you were sharing in terms of people disconnect with the things they want and desire, but their activity produces counter to that. They don't do the things they need to line up with the desires that they want, and so there becomes a conflict. Share a little bit about who are the intended audience for your book, and particularly, is there a part of that focuses directly toward men, or are they just sort of a byproduct of all the other levels in your book in terms of pastoral counseling?
Sure. The book is intended for a number of different audiences, which made it extremely difficult to write at times, and I am truly grateful for the input and advice of my editor, who said at times, Curry, you're way too bookish. You're going to miss these people over there. Or Curry, you need to beef it up. You know, you're kind of dumbing it down. Give us more substance. So it was a creative process,
Wow.
a collaborative process, and I am indeed grateful for her assistance. It is intended for clergy, clergy in training, pastors, preachers who are not pastors. Some instances, for whatever reason, the pastor cannot afford to minister to individuals, couples, and families. For example, he or she may have an audience of 10,000 people where an interpersonal ministry is just completely impossible. So it's intended for preachers, pastors, clergy, academicians who teach courses in pastoral care and counseling, mental health professionals, psychologists, and psychiatrists who find the need to explore the person's religious beliefs in order to help them. It's intended for students as well who want to learn the theory and the practice, the techniques associated with pastoral counseling. I should probably say the obvious, which is it's actually possible to hurt someone psychologically or emotionally, even spiritually, if you don't understand how the person's mental processes work. If you don't understand Sigmund Freud's contribution to the field, or if you don't understand the Judeo-Christian message, you can actually leave a person worse than how you found him or her. You can leave them broken. So understanding the theory, the theology, and the techniques of pastoral counseling are essential for growing a healthy church, a healthy congregation. Hence the need for the book, I think.
Wow. Let's give me a little of the insights of the book. I know, I mean, the people, when they get the book, they will begin to dive into the different divisions and different areas. But you gave some examples of people being hurt, not knowing the makeup of their background, whether they're Judeo-Christian or their upbringing and some other way. How can ministry and how can, especially one who's supposed to be counseling, how they can leave a person worse off than they originally came in contact with them? Give me examples of that process and how someone can totally, without having your book, miss the mark from that standpoint.
Sure. We all have challenges, interpersonal or extrapersonal or intrapsychic challenges. We are human. And unfortunately, we experience anxiety and we use coping mechanisms in order to progress through reality, to demonstrate functioning in our personal or professional lives. Some of us cope in sociably acceptable ways. When we're stressed out, we'll go ride a bike. And some of us cope, unfortunately, with or cope in detrimental ways. We drown our sorrows away in alcohol. The Bible identifies drunkenness as a sin, not necessarily drinking. My friends tell me, who occasionally have a glass of wine, look, Curry, Jesus turned water into wine. We could drink from time to time. Okay, point well taken. But drunkenness and or, let's say, alcoholism, being excessively drunk, is sinful behavior, and we can find that in the New Testament. As sinful behavior, a preacher, a pastor may preach against it because sin is, of course, rebellion or moral transgression, and occasionally preachers say, hey, we shouldn't lie, cheat, and steal and be drunk because these are sinful things. We need to repent, turn from our ways, and be forgiven and lead great lives. Well, preaching about drunkenness to alcoholics may not be an effective strategy to get them to stop drinking. If you talk to the average alcoholic, and I've spent years in counseling as an inpatient counselor and as an outpatient counselor while I was working on my master's degree. Preaching about it doesn't necessarily help the patient or the client. In fact, it furthers their sense of guilt, according to certain studies. It furthers their sense of shame. If you ask them, do you know they're an alcoholic? Many times they'll say, yeah, I know I have a problem, and you telling me about it is not necessarily helping me with it. Counseling is not about preaching. Preaching is proclaiming. Counseling is listening. It's listening to the person's personal narrative to find out why, in fact, he or she drinks. Maybe something happened in his or her past which is painful, and they can't cope with it by talking about it, so they drink to forget about it. Maybe they've been abused and they can't talk about it for whatever reason. It may be repressed. Whatever happened was so terrible that they honestly don't remember it, and through hypnosis it will come to fruition what has happened. And well, they don't know why they drink. It's the pastoral counselor's job to get the person to talk about his or her background. So, for example, in the book I outlined the basics of the counseling session, where it should be held, say like in an office in the church, who should be present, maybe you and the client, and maybe an administrative assistant just in case something happens, or you feel as if something is going to happen which could expose the pastor and the church to liability, so you may want to have a third party present. How to structure an interview, how to put together a case analysis. One of the first questions you may want to ask is, what is the presenting problem? The person may not even know why they're there, and it would be helpful to know that. Have they been diagnosed before? Are they under a doctor's care now? Are they dual diagnosed? Do they have more than one presenting problems? Are they on medication? Is religion helpful to them? The assumption is if they come to a pastoral counselor, religion is helpful. That's not always the case. Many people have serious problems with organized religion. They're drawn to it, but they're distrustful of it and the people who represent it at the same time. So one of the things you want to do is get all of the information that you possibly can about the person's medical history, cultural background, psychological background before you begin the counseling session. And you may find out that you don't even have the skill set to deal with this person. They're suicidal and you need to make a referral immediately. But essentially the book outlines how to conduct a basic pastoral counseling session, or to how to set up a pastoral counseling program in your church, the necessary human capital and financial resources in order to make that happen.
Wow, man, that's beautiful. You know, as you were talking, and there's so much that I gleaned from our dialogue, and one of the things that came to my heart when you start talking about how individuals come into pastoral counseling or care, that the first thing is to bring some level of condemnation many times, or guilt.
Yes.
Why is that? And why, when an arena such as this, pastoral counseling, that seems to be the more predominant tool to bring transformation, as opposed to, you said, listening and going beneath the surface, the symptoms of people's issues, because sometimes you find that people, they keep coming back and back and back. They go through counsel,
yes,
and the counsel does not seem to be effective for whatever reason.
Yes.
But explain, or kind of expound, if you could, in terms of why, even from a psychological standpoint or ecclesiastical standpoint, why guilt and condemnation more often is used as a tool for transformation.
Sure. I think that we need a healthy level of guilt and shame. We learn it since we are children in the various stages of psychosocial development. Shame versus guilt with Erik Erikson with the 8 stages of psychosocial development. But what we also know is too much guilt or shame isn't healthy. And I think that we are presented with the task of well, inspiring people as clergy or as lay Christians, but we're also charged with the task of stating what's right and what's wrong according to the ethics that were put before us in the Bible. Jesus said we should love our neighbors as we love ourselves. We should love God, even if we have enemies, and we probably do. In fact, if we're doing the work of Christ and everyone's our friend, chances are we're doing something wrong. I mean, someone should be against us. We're supposed to love our enemies. And if we aren't loving God, or if we aren't loving our neighbors or our enemies, maybe something is wrong and we need to correct that. So in that sense, it's healthy. I don't know if everyone understands the pathological dynamics associated with excessive guilt. Some people have shame-based identities. They can't make eye contact. They are guilt-ridden, so to speak. They have shame-based personalities, and the church does a lot to help these people with corporate worship. It inspires people, and people come into church one way and they leave church another way and they feel healthy. This book is an educative tool. It says that people are multifaceted. We are psychological beings, we are spiritual beings, we are cultural beings, and it seeks to find a balance between various worlds or dimensions, if you will, to provide a holistic ministry in order to help the entire person. I think that if more people knew about the significance of a mental health ministry, ministries would look differently. I believe that people are interested in the holistic development, but because of historical circumstances, we weren't always provided as African Americans psychiatrists and psychologists. We came to the church. So we don't always turn to pastors for pastoral counseling. We don't see the need for mental health services. Sometimes there's a stigma associated with it. We don't want to go because that means we're crazy. Well, I would submit we're crazy if we don't go. We need help sometimes mentally, and it's okay to ask for help. No one's perfect, and we all have psychological challenges from time to time. So I don't think that everyone recognizes the need for it. I think that if they did, more resources would be focused on developing a mental health ministry in the local church.
Wow, that's beautiful. And I'm glad you addressed that, the stigma behind the mental health part of it, because many would rather go and receive, it's okay to receive pastoral care, but when you start talking about psychological care and going into that level, I know you talk a little bit about the postmodern versus ecclesiastical approach in terms of your counseling prospect. One of the things I wanted to ask you is, and I know there's so many areas that you're touching on, it's a powerful book, was what was more preeminent in the forms of counseling, or the particular arena of counseling seems to be more prevalent than others. And I know you talked outside a little bit about, you do pre-marriage counseling, you do marriage counseling, you do post-marriage counseling. You got genderizing, you got ethnicity, you got race, you got culture, you got all these things going on, you know. But what seems to be, and not necessarily ranking them in order, but what seems to be more prevalent than any in terms of all the different counseling that you provide?
Sure. For couples, I would say premarital counseling as opposed to marital counseling. sometimes there's a financial incentive for receiving premarital counseling, a discount on the marriage license. So they come and receive counseling, which is essential, I would argue, for a healthy marriage. What's interesting about premarital counseling is that as we talk about values, some want to save money, one person wants to save, another wants to spend, one wants to have 3 children, one wants to have 1 child or no children at all. Oftentimes they aren't evenly yoked, to use a biblical expression, but they're intent on getting married. And that's somewhat challenging at times to say, hey, you all seem like a wonderful couple, but you'll need to address some things. And if you come to the conclusion that you aren't compatible, is marriage sometimes off the table, and they don't want to consider that at all. They come in with a conclusion in mind. They're allowing the tail to wag the dog. We're going to get married, right. So that's quite a challenge, but it's very frequent. From time to time, I address people who are grieving a lot. People miss loved ones, and they are going through some aspect of the grief cycle. The initial shock, and the second stage may be denial. I cannot believe that this has happened. Are you sure that this has happened? This seems like a bad dream, and I would like to awaken from it. The anger, why did he or she make that decision to go out late at night, and it wasn't a great decision, just the anger. And unfortunately, sometimes anger at God. Why, God, did you allow this to happen to such a beautiful person? And grief counseling is special counseling. It's a sacred moment, if you will. And at the end, people accept it, and they grow spiritually sometimes to accept God's ways, or they understand themselves a lot better, having gone through that process and the limitations, but also the joy of the life cycle. So I would say that premarital counseling and grief counseling are probably the most common types of counseling.
Wow, I tell you, the Star book, man. I mean, this is powerful to go into the pastoral counseling as you've done, and we got to have you back on because this is a wealth. I'll tell you, things have changed since the last time you've been on, and but I would be remiss not to give you the last word, man, the last word of encouragement in terms of just counseling and what your book offers.
Sure. Thank you, Brother Tate. I would say that don't give up. People can change. We are not static. We are not incorrigible. God can make a difference in our lives. If we are struggling with something psychologically or emotionally or spiritually, God is able. See a pastoral counselor. Allow him or her to sit down and to help you. Don't give up on yourself. Don't give up on life. God is able.
Wow, God is able.
Yes, sir.
Man, that's awesome. Stay focused. Man, awesome.
It's good to see you.
Man, wow, awesome job, man.